Hi, y'all. I'm Julie. I'm a trauma-informed adoptee coach and somatic healing guide. After overcoming deep abandonment wounds, I now help adult adoptees move from feeling lost and disconnected to experiencing profound self-belonging. I know what it is like to carry the weight of abandonment, to feel stuck in patterns of longing, adapting, and searching for belonging. To have tried every healing modality available and come up empty. My own healing has taught me this. The answers aren't out there. They're buried within me, and I'm here to guide you home to yourself. The Resilience Project podcast brings voice, visibility, and validation to the parts of adoption society rarely names, but all of us feel. Through an trauma-informed somatic lens, I explore the lived experiences of the entire adoption constellation with a tender emphasis on the adoptee experience. This podcast goes beyond storytelling into soul-telling. It offers embodied insight, compassionate education, and a path towards awareness, hope, and strength. Each episode invites listeners to understand adoption more deeply, not just with the mind, but with the nervous system, and to reconnect with the truth, identity, and belonging that were always yours to come home to. Welcome. Hey, y'all, and welcome back to the Resilience Project podcast. It is great to be with you. We are going to spend some time talking about a core issue that all of us adoptees deal with. It's one of the ones that when I polled the people in my Resilience Project Facebook group that came up, and that is grief. It is something that is different from loss, and I think it's important to be able to differentiate between the two. And if you want to learn more about loss, I talked about that in episode 4. But today we are going to talk about grief, and I'm going to define it from an adoptee perspective and hopefully talk about some things that will help you understand the layers that we end up needing to uncover as we move through grief when it shows up for us. And I'll share some personal stories too in order to hopefully solidify this a little bit more. But first, let's start with some definitions. There is one that I really appreciate from Cameron Lee Small's book. I'm going to show everybody The Adoptee's Journey if you're on YouTube. He says that grief can be conceptualized as the internal physiobiological response to loss. So 2 different things. I'm going to explain that in a minute. It represents feelings, thoughts, emotions, and biological systems related to an individual's response to loss. These can include the death of a significant person, but can also include the termination of relationships, divorce, friendships. That is the definition of grief. It is complex. It is something that we do need to process. One of the things that I really, really appreciate from the Grief Recovery Handbook, y'all, I'm going to be using a lot of resources today. So if you want to get these, awesome. I'll put them in the show notes so that you can do your own work on this. But this has been a long process for me, and I'm still in the middle of it right now. But the biggest thing that I have noticed for myself as an adoptee in most of the relationships that I have lost, moved through, whatever, that have involved grief, this is the one thing that I have noticed. That unresolved grief is always about undelivered emotional communications that accrue within a relationship over the course of time. Okay. What about grief that we carry within us cellularly because we've lost connection with our biology, with our culture, with our identity? These are layers that a lot of people don't think about. Kept people don't think about this. This is something that lives within us, dormant and unresolved. Like that said, when it's not fully processed or completed, as the grief recovery method talks about, it becomes stuck in our bodies, typically in the heart area, that nerve bundle that's connected to the vagus nerve there. It can hinder our ability to move beyond it. It keeps us stuck, like I just said. And as I said earlier, it is a core issue for us adoptees. And in my Revolution program, we were so blessed to be able to have a grief recovery specialist come in and speak to us about this. And I will also put her information in the show notes if anybody would be interested in connecting with her, because she's wonderful. Her name is Karen. She's a dear friend of mine. I wanted to make sure we had an understanding of this, because when we don't acknowledge grief, name grief as it is, and what we are actually grieving, and allow ourselves to process through it, it causes imbalance in our bodies. So, like I talked about in episode 4, loss is the fact of what happened. And there's multiple facets of that. So if you want to learn more about it, please go ahead and listen or watch episode 4. Grief is the emotional imprint that is left on us. It shows up as a physical heaviness. For me, the way that it feels literally is like an elephant sitting on my chest. I cannot breathe deeply when it shows up. I hear people say things like, my heart hurts, or my heart feels broken, or they have trouble, like I said earlier, breathing deeply. Like literally, when I feel this, it feels like I can only breathe to the very base of my neck. I cannot breathe into my belly. That's a problem. So grief can have, like Cameron talked about, a physiological response in our body. There is a difference between grief and mourning. So I'm going to read that definition from Cameron as well, so y'all know what that is. Mourning is the action or ritual that we practice in response to the feelings of grief. This is generally meant to help us, or a community, or an individual cope with these feelings. It's the outward expression of the inward reality. It's designed to help us draw meaning, resolution, and regulation around the fact of the loss that we experienced. These things are all very, very necessary for us to move through, experience, process. I have a great exercise called the Processing Emotions exercise that I will also link in the show notes that can definitely be helpful with this. What I would recommend if you do use it is message me, letting me know that you're going to be using it so that I can support you through it if you need it. For an adoptee, like I said, this grief can be multifaceted. It can be an experience that encompasses the loss of biological family, our personal history, our sense of belonging. It's often intensified. And this is what's important to understand for us adoptees. It's intensified by a societal lack of recognition and understanding. This is called disenfranchised grief. Let me define this even more. It's when society overlooks the complex emotions associated with what we have experienced in our adoption. This means that grief is not openly acknowledged for the adoptee, mourned, or supported, which further isolates us and makes it difficult for us to process our emotions at all, because it's not even acknowledged as something that needs to be processed. What we're told is, you're lucky, you should be grateful. All these phrases that I have mentioned multiple times. This grief can manifest in many different ways, as obviously sadness, as anger, as guilt, maybe even a longing for a past we never knew. It impacts our identity and our relationships. It's very, very heavy for us. And the interesting thing, it's heavy for everybody, but the layers for us as they are uncovered, I truly believe this is something that we will deal with and process for the rest of our lives. And that's okay, as long as we have people around us that are willing to acknowledge and receive and accept. They may not understand. I don't expect people to understand my lived experience. I wouldn't want them to have had to experience 4 different caregivers in the first 7 weeks of their lives. I wouldn't wish that on anyone, to produce this instability in the emotional connection with people and the inability to even want to touch or be close to someone because of that experience. And yet in that time, the infant, me, whomever it is experiencing so much grief. That is an emotion that we do experience and can experience. That's why we cry so much. You know, what's really, really interesting about this is in The Primal Wound by Nancy Verrier, the first book I ever read about this that I felt seen, heard, and understood by. She talks about during the 50s, 60s, and 70s, they used drugs to quiet us when we cried. They were safe, according to medical records at the time. They were safe to use on babies. But they used those to quiet us because we cry a lot. I wonder if the reason why my foster family ended up not being able to accommodate me anymore is because I was crying so much. I really don't know. I have no idea. All I know is that when I got to my adopted family, I slept for 24 hours. I was exhausted. My birth mom or my adopted mom could not wake me up. So this disenfranchised grief is extremely important for us to understand and to acknowledge, meaning society needs to see that what we experience as infants or, toddlers, depending upon when we're adopted, there's clients that I work with who are 4 when they were adopted. I know there's people who are 5, 8, many in foster situations that were adopted much later. This leaves such loss, grief, and mourning dormant in our body. And until we actually begin to uncover it layer by layer and work through it, we will notice it in our body, which is what happened with me. When my birth mother in 2020 was dying, I got a call from my half-sister, and she told me that she was not long for this world and asked me, or just wanted to let me know that that's what was happening. And I had this feeling inside that I needed to make sure that I let her know that I had forgiven her for, the attempted abortions between weeks 12 and 16. I already had, but I wanted to make sure one more time so that she could move on from this life feeling freed and forgiven. And so I decided to fly from Virginia to Washington State and spend that time with her to make sure that I could communicate that with her. She was unresponsive, but I did get to communicate those things to her. And about 24 hours later, after I came to be with her, she died. And that's when I realized, once she was gone, that I had a bunch of unfinished business and unresolved things that I needed to deal with. And that's when I started my first adoption competent EMDR therapy. And what I can say about that is it took me a long time to be able to deal with the emotions that I was holding in my body, partly because I didn't have any knowledge of what was actually physically going on in my body. I didn't know the language of the body. So the grief that I was holding there that I needed to resolve, I didn't know how to do that. All I know is that I needed to allow myself to go there. The way that we hold grief is different for everyone. I think it's important to explore this and learn how we hold, navigate, experience it. I can give an example of how this shows up for me in just a second, but I want to share a couple of other things. When we are transplanted from one environment to an unfamiliar other environment or family, we are thrust into survival mode. Our very existence depends on us adapting to our new world, but we've lost everything that we know, and we are grieving that. With multiple caregiving changes, this can limit our ability to adapt because we end up living in a constant state of distress. This quote came directly from the Core Issues in Adoption and Permanency book. If y'all want it, I'll put the link in the show notes. It's honestly why it is so important to allow ourselves to grieve the losses that we experienced in order to help balance our body. How do we do that? So, about a week and a half ago, I got a call that in-law was back in the hospital and not doing well. And I know a lot of you know uh, from other podcasts that I've been on or personal conversations that I've had. I mean, it's not something that I have hidden, but it's not something that I've point blank shared publicly. But I was divorced almost exactly 2 years ago. Tomorrow will be 2 years after being married for almost 28. And it was one of the hardest things I've ever had to navigate when it comes to grief. I haven't even been ready to address it until the last few months, actually, since coming here to La Quinta and allowing myself to kind of restore, refresh. It's allowed me the space and the energy to be able to begin to focus on it. There is a quote from the grief recovery book that says, "Unresolved grief consumes a tremendous amount of energy. Holding on to incomplete emotions consumes enormous amounts of energy." We do that as adoptees from that primal trauma that we experience. We hold, and then expect people to leave us because that's what we experience. This divorce for me was an abandonment trauma that obviously was very reminiscent of what I had experienced when I was younger. So when I got that phone call, I immediately started crying. I love my in-law family. They will always be my family and have told me that I will always be their family. The minute that call came through, I started crying and I immediately had the muscle memory thought, I need to call my ex and make sure that he's okay. And right after that, I had a very, very clear feeling of anger. Why? Why is this still happening? It's been almost 2 years. Why can't I get over this? What is wrong with me? These are the thoughts that were flying through my head. This is muscle memory. I can't call him. That's not appropriate. I don't want to call him. I don't want to have this emotional contract anymore. For the rest of that day, I felt an immense amount of heaviness on my chest. It was that whole idea of an elephant sitting on my chest. I also had a ton of anger. One of the quotes that has really helped me work through grief is by C.S. Lewis. Well, it's attributed to him, and it's basically, I sat with my anger long enough until she told me she was grief. And I knew that what my body was trying to tell me was I have to release these unresolved emotions, these undelivered emotional communications that I will never be able to communicate appropriately to my ex. And so I made a decision that day that I was going to set aside, I made an appointment with myself. I was going to set aside time for 3 hours the next day to finish the statements that I needed to finish. There is a process that you go through in the grief recovery method that really does help you move through grief in a way that allows you to complete it. That does not mean that the emotions go away. That does not mean that you won't deal with things, again, having to do with whatever it is, the grief of the adoption loss or the grief of the divorce loss. But it provides you with tools to be able to move it through your body. So I spent that time on Saturday before Thanksgiving and moved through it. And it was really hard. It's still really hard to think about. It's emotional, it's heavy, but all I can say is that it's necessary. And then the next day, I drove to my mother-in-law's house to spend Thanksgiving with her. We have a wonderful relationship. So I went in there with a pretty fresh, open wound in a way, but I knew I wanted to work through all of that part of it before I got there. And then when I got there on Sunday, there was a picture frame that had photos of my ex and his new life, and it really triggered me. I felt like I was getting stabbed in the heart. And I spent the next few days really sitting with those emotions and allowing God in my prayer time to really kind of wash me clean, if that makes sense. I was allowing myself to receive comfort from him and taking that time to allow myself to receive it. And one of the intentions that I set going into that time was, I don't want to feel pain anymore. I'm done feeling pain whenever I see his face. And what's amazing, I think I'm getting emotional because it was just beautiful. I was able to really work through that. And I don't feel pain. As a matter of fact, I still pray for him every single day and his life because I do not want to get stuck in victim mindset and stuck in this happened to me, not for me. So being able to get to that place of allowing myself to move through, process, feel the emotions, notice where they sat on my body, the elephant on my chest, show that part of my body the attention that it needed by releasing it the next day. I'm happy to move through this stuff with you guys in my Revolution program. We do a lot of this work in there, and it's revolutionary, if you will. But it's an experience, and it's something that I was so proud of how I navigated that and being able to, I actually did a somatic exercise when I was there where I kept the photo frame in sight and I had my hand on my heart and I kind of leaned over and looked at it and allowed myself to take a deep breath, felt what it felt like in my body, and then said, I am okay right now with who I am. It was something like that. I can't remember the phrase that I said. I probably should have looked and prepared that in my journal, but forgot. This was kind of on the fly, y'all. Didn't know I was fully going to share this because this is not something I've shared publicly. And as I did that little bit of exposure somatic work with the picture frame, the next day did that work with God, asking him to remove that pain feeling. I didn't feel it anymore. It really did go away because I gave it the space that it needed. So let me go back to this whole idea of disenfranchised grief. When society overlooks the grief that we experience as adoptees and the complex emotions that are associated with adoption, I'm sorry, I get kind of fired up about this. When it's not acknowledged, mourned, supported, it isolates us. It causes us to feel like it's not okay. It keeps us in shame and secrecy. And rejection, to be honest, because our emotions are even rejected. So all I would ask for those of you who are not adoptees and are potentially listening to this podcast is allow us to grieve. Allow us to be able to say out loud what it is that we're experiencing without telling us that we should be grateful or that we were lucky or that we had a good family. All of that may be true. It definitely was for me. But honestly, you guys, for adoptees that I work with, a lot of them, it's not true. They've had really, really tough adoptive families. I was very, very blessed. Either way, that doesn't negate, erase, whatever, the grief that I felt in those first 7 weeks of my life. Or how much deeper I feel the abandonment wound of divorce because of that experience. So with all of that, I'm going to drop all of the resources in the show notes. I really hope you found this of value and helpful to you. Please find me on any of the socials. You can drop the word grief and I will send you the processing emotions exercise if you don't see it in the show notes, which I will include it in the show notes. Join my Facebook group if you're an adoptee. Come into my world, y'all, and ask me whatever questions you want. I'm more than happy to answer them. All I want for our population is for society to begin to acknowledge these things that we experience and stop minimizing them. So I look forward to hearing from you. Like I've said, every single week, DM me on any of the socials. You can find me at Julie Brumley. You can find me on YouTube. You can find my website at comingHomeToSelf.co. And just keep listening to the podcast and you'll be getting more and more of these nuggets and information. And I just can't wait to be with you. I really enjoy doing this. I look forward to talking to you next Thursday. Have a great weekend.